The thunder crashed across the Montana mountains like drums of war. Park Juno pulled his jacket tighter and stepped onto the wooden porch of his cabin. He needed to check if the firewood was covered before the storm got worse. The wind was already picking up, bending the pine trees near his property. That's when he saw something strange near his porch steps. At first, he thought it was a pile of clothes someone had left behind. But then the pile moved. Juno's hand went automatically to his hip, where he kept his pistol. 20 years as a Marine had taught him to be careful with surprises. He moved closer slowly, his boots creaking on the wet wood. It wasn't a pile of clothes. It was a person, or something like a person. She was lying against his porch railing, barely breathing. Her skin was a deep purple color that seemed to shimmer in the lightning flashes. She had 4 eyes, 2 where human eyes should be, and 2 smaller ones near her temples. All 4 were half closed, struggling to stay open. Juno's shock lasted only a second. Then his training took over. He had been a field medic before becoming an officer. He knew what a dying person looked like, human or not. "Easy there," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "I'm not going to hurt you." She wore some kind of uniform, but it was torn and burned. Dark liquid that might be blood stained the fabric. A small device on her neck glowed weakly and made her words come out in English. "Please." Her voice was barely a whisper. "Just need to rest." Juno made his decision quickly. This wasn't an invader. This wasn't a threat. This was someone hurt and scared, collapsed on his porch in the middle of a storm. That was all that mattered. "Come on," he said, carefully sliding his arm under her shoulders. "Let's get you inside where it's warm." She was lighter than he expected, even though she was tall, maybe 6.5 feet. He guided her through his front door and into the small living room. The fire in the fireplace cast warm light across the wooden walls. He laid her gently on his old couch. "I'm going to look at your injuries," Juno said, moving to the closet where he kept his medical supplies. "I was a medic in the military. I'll be careful." She nodded weakly, too tired to do anything else. Juno worked quickly but gently. Her body was different from a human's, but wounds were wounds. He could see what needed cleaning and what needed bandaging. He wiped away the dark blood, checked for broken bones, and wrapped clean cloth around the worst cuts. "Here," he said, holding a glass of water to her lips. "Drink slowly." She drank like someone who hadn't had water in days. Her 4 eyes watched him carefully, full of suspicion and confusion and desperate hope all mixed together. "My name is Kale," she managed to say between sips. "I'm Park Juno. Most people just call me Juno." He finished wrapping a bandage around a nasty cut on her arm. "You're safe here, Kale. Rest now. Tomorrow we can figure out what comes next." "Why?" She struggled to keep her eyes open. "Why are you helping me?" Juno paused, thinking about the question. He remembered being lost and alone after his last deployment. He remembered the strangers who had helped him when he needed it most. The neighbor who brought him food when he couldn't leave his house. The veteran at the support group who just listened without judging. "Because you needed help," he said simply. "That's enough reason for me." Kale's eyes finally closed. Her breathing became slower and more steady. She was asleep. Juno pulled a thick blanket from the closet and covered her carefully. Then he sat down in his old armchair across from the couch, holding his coffee mug. The storm continued to rage outside, rain hammering against the windows. He would keep watch tonight. Old habits from the military never really died. When you were responsible for someone's safety, you didn't sleep until you knew they were secure. He looked at the sleeping alien on his couch. Her uniform, despite being damaged, looked important. Official, the kind of thing high-ranking officers wore. But that didn't matter right now. Right now, she was just someone hurt who needed a safe place to heal. Juno sipped his coffee and listened to the storm. He had no idea that he had just given shelter to the most powerful military commander in the entire galaxy. He had no idea that this simple act of kindness would change everything. He only knew that it was the right thing to do. Outside, lightning split the sky. Inside, 2 soldiers from different worlds rested under the same roof. The smell of coffee and frying eggs filled the small cabin. Kale opened her eyes slowly. confused for a moment about where she was. Then she remembered the storm, the collapse, the human who had helped her. She sat up carefully, testing her injuries. Everything still hurt, but the sharp pain was gone. The bandages were clean and professionally done. Through the doorway, she could see Juno in the kitchen, cooking breakfast like nothing unusual had happened. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Wasn't sure what you could eat, so I made extra of everything. Take what works for you." Kale stood slowly and walked to the kitchen. She expected questions, demands, maybe even threats. Instead, Juno just slid a plate toward her and kept eating, reading something on an old tablet. "Thank you," she said quietly, surprised by his lack of curiosity. "You're welcome," he replied, still not looking up. "Coffee's fresh if you drink it." She tried the eggs. They were good. Simple, but good. They ate in comfortable silence. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine that surprised Kale. She had expected to leave after one night, but Juno never suggested it. He never asked who she was or where she came from. He just accepted her presence like it was the most natural thing in the world. On the second day, she found him fixing a broken fence behind the cabin. Without asking, she picked up tools and helped. Her body was stronger now, healing faster than human bodies would. "You don't have to do that," Juno said. "I want to," Kale replied. "You've given me shelter. Let me help." He nodded and showed her what needed fixing. On the third day, he taught her how to work in his small vegetable garden. She learned about tomatoes and beans and herbs she had never seen before. The work was simple and peaceful. Her hands got dirty. The sun was warm on her face. On the fifth evening, they sat on the porch together, watching the sunset paint the mountains orange and gold. Juno had 2 bottles of beer. He offered her one. "I was in the military," he said suddenly, looking at the mountains instead of at her. "Marines. 20 years. Too many wars. Too many deployments." Kale listened quietly. "I made decisions that got people killed." Juno continued, his voice steady but sad. "Good people. Friends. They followed my orders, and some of them didn't come home. The decisions were necessary, probably, but they still weigh on me." He took a long drink from his bottle. "That's why I'm here now," he said. "In this cabin, away from everything. Sometimes you need distance from what you were to remember who you are underneath it all." Kale felt something break inside her chest, something that had been holding tight for too long. "I commanded soldiers too," she said softly. "Many soldiers, from many worlds, for decades." Juno looked at her but didn't interrupt. "I lost more than I saved," Kale continued. "Decades of war. No breaks. No rest. Just battle after battle. Decision after decision. I couldn't remember anymore why I was fighting, what I was protecting. It all became just numbers. Strategy. Necessary losses." Her 4 eyes filled with tears. "I just needed to stop," she whispered. "Just for a little while. I needed to remember what peace felt like." Juno nodded slowly. "You don't have to explain anything to me. I understand." They sat in silence as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Somewhere in the distance, a bird called out. The wind moved through the pine trees with sound like the ocean. "You're high-ranking," Juno said. It wasn't a question. "Very," Kale admitted. "They'll be looking for you." "Yes." "When they find you, will you be in trouble?" Kale smiled sadly. "Probably." Juno stood up and stretched. "Well, until they do, you're welcome to stay. The guest room is yours as long as you need it. No questions asked." That night, Kale slept in a real bed for the first time in weeks. She didn't dream of battles or burning ships or the faces of soldiers she had sent to die. She didn't wake up in panic, reaching for weapons that weren't there. She just slept, deep, peaceful, healing sleep. Outside her window, the stars shone bright and clear. Some of those stars were ships, she knew, part of the vast fleets she commanded. But for now, they seemed very far away. For now, she was just Kale, not a commander, not a leader, just someone learning to plant tomatoes and fix fences with a kind human who asked for nothing in return. It was the most valuable gift anyone had given her in a very long time. 1 week had passed since Kale arrived at the cabin. She was sitting on the porch after dinner when she noticed the lights in the sky. They moved in patterns that were too precise, too organized to be natural. They were searching. Juno came outside with 2 mugs of hot tea. He looked up at the lights and then at her face. "They're looking for you," he said simply, handing her a mug. "Yes." Kale's voice was quiet. "Is it important?" Kale was silent for a moment. Then she sighed deeply. "I'm not just military. I'm very high-ranking, one of the highest. I left without telling anyone, without permission. I couldn't breathe anymore." Juno sat down beside her and sipped his tea. "I once disappeared during a training exercise. Just drove to the beach and sat there for 3 days. Didn't tell anyone where I was going. When I came back, my commanding officer was angry at first. Then he saw my face and understood. Sometimes the weight gets too heavy to carry." "You led soldiers?" Kale asked. "Company commander. About 150 men and women under my command. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria." He stared at his tea. "I made calls that got good people killed. Necessary calls, maybe. Strategic calls. But they still haunt me." Kale felt tears forming in her 4 eyes. "Yes, exactly that. I've made 10,000 decisions. Maybe more. Each one cost lives. Sometimes hundreds. Sometimes thousands. I kept telling myself it was necessary, that I was protecting more lives than I was spending. But after decades of this..." Her voice broke. "I couldn't remember why I was fighting anymore," she whispered. "What I was protecting. Who I was protecting. It all became just numbers on screens and tactical displays. And now..." Juno asked gently, "After this week?" Kale looked at the simple cabin, the garden they had worked on together, the fence they had fixed, the quiet mountains all around them. "Now I remember," she said, "this, peace like this, people like you, simple kindness. That's what we're protecting. That's what makes it worth it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. The searching lights moved across the sky, getting closer. A small device on Kale's wrist beeped. She looked at it and closed her eyes. "What is it?" Juno asked. "A message from my second-in-command. There's a peace summit happening. When enemy faction we've been fighting for 12 years. It's falling apart without me there." She looked tired. "If the summit fails, the war continues. Maybe for another decade. Maybe longer. That's a lot of lives depending on you. Always is." Kale's voice was bitter. Juno was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Can you stay one more day? There's a leak in the barn roof. Could use your help fixing it." Kale looked at him, surprised. Then she smiled, a real smile. "The galaxy is waiting and you want to fix a barn roof?" "The galaxy can wait one more day. Besides, rain's coming tomorrow. Need to fix it before then." The next day, they worked on the barn roof together. It was simple work. Physical work. Juno showed her how to replace the damaged shingles and seal the gaps. They worked slowly, not talking much, just focusing on the task. When they finished, they sat on the barn roof together, looking out at the mountains. "I have to go back," Kale said. "I know. I don't want to. I know that too." Juno looked at her seriously. "But running away isn't the same as healing. You needed this break. You needed to remember why you fight. Now you remember. Take that with you." "It'll get heavy again," Kale said quietly. "Yes, it will. But now you know what to do when it does. You take a break. You rest. You remember." He smiled. "And you know where I am if you need another place to rest." Kale laughed, but it was a sad sound. "You're very wise for someone who lives alone in the mountains." "I live alone in the mountains because I'm wise," Juno replied. "Took me years to figure that out." That evening, Kale sent a message back to her fleet. She would return tomorrow. She would lead the peace summit. But things would be different now. She looked at Juno, who was making dinner in the kitchen, humming an old song. He had saved her life. Not by treating her wounds, though that helped. He saved her by treating her like a person instead of commander, by giving her space to be just Kale for a few days, by showing her that kindness still existed in the universe. Tomorrow she would return to being Supreme Commander, but tonight she was just someone helping a friend make dinner. It was enough. The sun was just starting to rise when Juno heard the sound. It was like a deep rumble that made the whole cabin shake. He ran outside and stopped dead in his tracks. A massive ship hung in the sky above his property. It was bigger than anything he had ever seen, blocking out the morning sun. The metal hull gleamed with strange lights. Smaller ships were breaking away from it, descending toward his cabin. Juno's hand went to his hip, but he knew his pistol would be useless against something like this. He stood his ground as a landing craft touched down in his front yard, crushing his vegetable garden. A door opened and soldiers poured out. At least, they looked like soldiers. They wore armor and carried weapons and moved with military precision. But they were all different species, some tall, some short, some with extra arms, some floating in the air. Then an officer stepped forward. This one was tall and wore a pristine uniform covered in medals and insignia. The officer walked straight to Kale, who had come to stand beside Juno, and bowed deeply. "Supreme Commander Kale Var," the officer said in a formal voice, "the entire Galactic Coalition has been searching for you. We feared you were captured or killed." Juno turned slowly to look at Kale. "Supreme Commander?" Kale met his eyes. She looked guilty and sad. "Yes, I lead the combined military forces of the Galactic Coalition, over 10,000 species. I'm the highest-ranking military officer in the known galaxy. And you've been here fixing my fence and planting tomatoes," Juno said flatly. "Yes." The officer continued urgently. "Commander, the peace summit with the Talon Syndicate is collapsing. They refuse to negotiate with anyone except you. Our diplomats have tried everything. If we don't reach an agreement soon, the war will escalate. Millions of lives are at risk." More ships were landing now. Important-looking aliens in fancy clothes were stepping out, all looking worried and relieved at the same time. "Commander, we need you," another officer said. "Only you can save the summit." Kale stood frozen, looking at the ships and then at the simple cabin behind her. Juno could see the weight settling back onto her shoulders. The Supreme Commander was returning, and his friend Kale was disappearing. Juno took her arm and pulled her aside, away from the others. "You have to go," he said quietly. "I know, but I don't want to. I know, but those millions of lives they're talking about, they need you." Juno looked at her seriously. "Running away helped you rest. That's good, but you can't keep running. You have to go back." "It'll be heavy again," Kale whispered. "All of it. The decisions, the weight, the lives." "Yes, it will be." Juno gripped her shoulder firmly. "But now you know something important. You know you're not just a position or a rank. You're a person. You're Kale. Remember that when things get heavy." She looked at him with all four eyes wet with tears. "And for heaven's sake," Juno continued, "take actual leave next time. Don't just disappear. Tell them you need a break. Make it an order if you have to. Even Supreme Commanders need rest." Kale laughed through her tears. "You're giving orders to a Supreme Commander?" "I'm giving advice to a friend." Kale pulled him into a hug. It shocked the watching officers, their Supreme Commander embracing a human. But she didn't care. "Thank you, Part Juno," she whispered. "Thank you for seeing me. Not the Commander. Just me. You're welcome. And you know where I am if you need sanctuary again." Kale stepped back and straightened her posture. Juno watched as she transformed. Her shoulders went back. Her chin lifted. The exhausted, wounded person who collapsed on his porch was gone. In her place stood someone who commanded the respect of 10,000 worlds. "Prepare the fleet," she ordered in a voice that made everyone snap to attention. "We return to the summit immediately, and from now on, all senior officers will take mandatory rest periods." "That's a direct order." "Yes, Commander," the officers responded in unison. Kale walked toward the waiting ship, then stopped and turned back. "I'll visit again. Properly next time. I'll keep the guest room ready." She smiled a real smile and boarded the ship. The landing craft rose into the air, returning to the massive vessel above. Within minutes, the entire fleet disappeared into the sky, leaving only crushed vegetables and scorched marks in the grass. Juno stood alone in his yard. He looked at the damage and shook his head. Well, he said to himself, that was interesting. Then he went inside to make coffee. He had a garden to replant. 6 months passed quietly. Juno's life returned to normal, or mostly normal. He replanted his garden. He fixed the scorch marks in his yard. He went back to his peaceful routine of chopping wood, fishing, and watching the mountains. But things were different now. He knew about the wider universe. Sometimes at night he would look at the stars and wonder which ones were actually ships. He kept up with the news and saw reports about successful peace treaties between alien factions he had never heard of before. One afternoon in early spring, Juno was splitting logs when he heard the familiar sound of a ship landing. This one was smaller and quieter than the military vessels from before. A sleek transport touched down gently in his yard, careful not to damage the new plants. A woman stepped out. She was human, wearing an elegant suit with the Galactic Coalition symbol on her collar. She bowed respectfully to Juno. "Captain Part Juno," she said in Korean, then switched to English. "My name is Lee Myrie. I'm an ambassador with the Galactic Coalition. I bring greetings from Supreme Commander Caleb Various. Is she all right?" Juno asked immediately. Ambassador Lee smiled. "More than all right. She's thriving, actually. The peace summit was a complete success. The war with the Talon Syndicate ended 3 months ago. Permanent peace treaty. First one in over a decade." Juno felt relief wash over him. "That's good news." "It's more than good news. It's historic." Lee pulled out a tablet and showed him footage of the summit. The commander used what she called the human approach. She treated the Talon leaders like people with real concerns instead of just enemies to defeat. She listened. She found common ground. She showed empathy. "Sounds like basic diplomacy to me." Juno said, "Perhaps, but it revolutionized how we approach conflict resolution. The commander credits her time here with you for teaching her this approach." Lee swiped to show more images. "She's implemented major changes across the entire coalition military. Mandatory rest periods for all officers. Mental health support programs. Meditation and recovery centers on every major base." Juno raised his eyebrows. "All from 1 week in Montana? Your cabin has become something of a legend. We call it the sanctuary principle in our leadership training now. The idea that even the most powerful leaders need a safe place to simply be human, or whatever species they are." "That's a bit much," Juno muttered, embarrassed. "The Coalition Council wishes to honor you officially," Lee continued. "They want to give you medals, titles, maybe even position as an advisor on human coalition relations." "No," Juno interrupted firmly. "No medals, no titles, no positions." Lee looked surprised. "But you helped end a war. You changed how an entire galactic civilization approaches leadership and mental health. Surely you deserve recognition." Juno shook his head. "I gave a tired person a place to sleep. That's all. If you want to honor me, make sure your soldiers actually use those mental health programs. Make sure they get real help when they need it. That's all the honor I need." Lee studied him for a moment, then smiled. "The commander said you would say exactly that. She knows me pretty well." "She's here, actually," Lee said, gesturing to the ship. "Wanted to visit personally." Kale emerged from the transport, and Juno couldn't help but smile. She looked completely different from the exhausted, wounded alien who had collapsed on his porch. Her skin was bright and healthy. Her 4 eyes were clear and alert. She moved with confidence and energy. But when she saw Juno, she didn't act like a supreme commander. She just grinned and held up fishing gear. "I brought better equipment this time," she called out. "Thought we could catch dinner properly." Juno laughed. "Did you get permission for this leave, or did you just disappear again?" "Official leave. 2 full days. I even filled out the paperwork." She walked over, and they embraced like old friends. "I learned my lesson." They walked to the pond together, leaving Ambassador Lee to wait by the ship. The water was calm and clear, reflecting the blue sky above. "You saved my life," Kale said as they cast their lines. "I just offered you my couch." "You offered humanity. You saw a person when everyone else saw a title and a rank. That changed everything for me." She looked at him seriously. "I'm a better leader now because of what you taught me. I didn't teach you anything. You just remembered who you were underneath all that responsibility." They fished in comfortable silence, two old soldiers from different worlds, enjoying simple peace. Above them, stars began appearing in the evening sky. Some were just stars. Others were ships carrying people across the galaxy, living in the peace that Kale had helped create. And it all started because one human saw someone who needed help and offered them sanctuary. No questions asked. Sometimes the greatest acts of heroism are the simplest ones.